Good evening, everybody. We are continuing the story of the divided kingdom, and we are looking at 2 Kings chapter 8. We have looked at it, the first part, and we will continue and finish it this evening. Now, we saw God's sovereignty last week in the story where Elisha was able to foresee and tell Hazael from Aram, that is from Syria, that he would assassinate his king Ben-Hadad and later commit atrocities against the people of Israel. And that is 2 Kings chapter 8, verses 7 to 15. Elisha was able to see that Hazael would kill a lot of Israelites in a cruel way. So, this does not mean that God condones. God's sovereignty does not mean that God condones the atrocities, the wicked deeds that man commits to fellow men. It simply means that God knows, and he allows man's choices of right and wrong, whatever they decide to do, to be integrated into how he will work out his final plan for man. And this is how God will also work out and see and test human obedience and the building of Christ-like character. And so through Elisha, he revealed to Hazael the sin that he could commit. He could commit in the near future. And this tells Hazael, as well as all of us in that kind of situation, that God foresees or God knows what Hazael could be doing in the future. In the same way, God knows and foresees what each one of us could do in the future. For Hazael, knowing the possible future, it was up to him whether he would go ahead to fulfill it. Would he assassinate his king Ben-Hadad or not? So it was up to him to choose evil or good. The future has still not happened, you see, when he's told about the prophecy. And when that future time arrives, each of us can still choose. Yeah, it has not happened. So we can still choose to do the right or the wrong, despite what we are told about it. It is still within our power to make the right choices or choice when we come to a situation in the future. So God is sovereign means God knows, and it tells us that he is still in overall control at the end of the day. In a practical way, this means that people will have to answer to him as the highest authority and power. And this answering to God could take place either on earth while we are still alive, or it could take place on the day of judgment when we all stand before the judgment seat of Christ. Or it could take place both on earth as well as on the judgment day. Whatever choices Hazael made, he would have to answer to God for them. In application, similarly for us, whatever choices we make, good or bad, we will have to answer to God for them. That was what we finished off with last session. So for today, we continue the story. This is the familiar table that I started. I thought it would be good for us to know which king we are dealing with. All right, so today's story is on Jehoram of the king of Judah, as well as Joram, whose name incidentally is the same, right? So during this part of the story, These are the two kings in power from Judah as well as from Israel. Now, I highlighted in gray Jehoshaphat because Jehoshaphat was actually still alive and still active at this point in time. Okay, we will talk about that in a moment. And then I also highlighted in gray Elisha because Elisha was still alive and he played a small part in today's story. And then we will also be looking at two other kings after these two Yorams, Yehu of Israel and Ahaziah from Judah. So with that, let's continue the story with number 5, the 5th king. As you can see here, I've written number 5 here to say that Jehoram is actually the 5th king of southern Judah. So he came to reign, he came on the throne, estimated time 848 to 841 BC, 8 years. And you can read his story in 2 Kings chapter 8, as well as 2 Chronicles 21. Looking at the key points, he was 32 years old when he became king of Judah in the 5th year of Joram. Bear in mind the two of them actually have the same name. So in the 5th year of Joram of Israel, he became king, while Jehoshaphat, his father, was still king of Judah. 2 Kings 8:16. Now 2 Kings 1 verse 17 says that Jehoram of Judah reigned in the 2nd year of Jehoram of Israel. You can see here the name used these are called variants. They are the same person, but in Hebrew, the name could be a slightly different variant. Okay, so Joram of Israel in 2 Kings 8:16, Jehoram became king in his 5th year, but in 2 Kings 1:17, it says Jehoram of Judah reigned in the 2nd year of Jehoram of Israel. So there's a discrepancy. One is a 5th year, one is the 2nd year. So this discrepancy can be explained when we understand that there is an initial co-regency period. Co-regency, meaning that two people were king at the same time. Very likely, Jehoram became co-regent with Jehoshaphat, his father, before Jehoram became the sole and only ruler on Jehoshaphat's death, about 848 BC. Some suggest that Jehoshaphat may have temporarily installed Jehoram as co-regent when he went to fight alongside Ahab against Aram, and then he removed him on return because Jehoshaphat came back safely. So then he removed the son as king, but later on he reinstated him again. So that could explain an overlap of what we call co-regency period and explain the difference in the two statements of different years. So Jehoram, as king, we are told that he walked in the ways of the kings of Israel. That's not a very good thing to say, walked in the ways of the kings of Israel, because all the kings of Israel were wicked. They disobeyed God, they dishonored God. And we see the reason: he married Ahab's daughter Athaliah, and he did evil in the eyes of the Lord. So he was influenced by his wife, Athaliah, who was Ahab's daughter. And he introduced Baal worship to the people, and he faced revolts from Edom and Libnah, which he could not put down. So, despite Jehoram's evil, the Lord maintained a lamp for David and his descendants forever. Bible says that God was not willing to destroy Judah for the sake of his servant David. 2 Kings 8:19. Right? So we can see that God preserved Judah and made sure that Judah was not destroyed. And so repeatedly we see God's hand and God's mercy to preserve the godly line of David, despite the ungodliness of David's descendants. So it is clear that the Bible in the Old Testament also shows a lot of God's mercy and grace. Grace and mercy of God is not just found in the New Testament. It's not only found when Jesus came. Grace and mercy of God can be found throughout the whole Bible. And there are times when we can observe that God continues to watch over us. Not because we are good, not because of our own efforts, not because we deserve it. Yeah, not because we deserve it. But one possible reason, as we saw here, is his faithfulness. His faithfulness to those who have been faithful and obedient before. Another possible reason that God continues to watch over and bless us is the intercession of others. Sometimes it's because somebody has been praying for us, and that's why God is so good to us. So there could be various reasons why God continues to watch over us and be good to us, even though we may not be that faithful or that good in terms of following God. And so this is a challenge and a motivation for each of us to strive to be faithful like David. Our faithfulness can well be the reason God will be faithful and good to our children and to the people who come after us. So that's something we can see in the story of Jehoram, God's faithfulness and God's goodness. He maintained a lamp for David. Going on, we see that in 841 BC, after Jehoram died, his son Ahaziah took over the throne, and it was only a short period of actually less than 1 year. Actually less than 1 year when you consider all the time factors of the various kings. Ahaziah's story can be found in 2 Kings chapter 8, the last few verses, 25 to 29, and 2 Chronicles chapter 22. Now, he was 22 years old when he became king in Jerusalem. And he was influenced by his mother, Athaliah. Remember just now, Jehoshaphat married Ahab's daughter, Athaliah, the evil influence. So here, Ahaziah was influenced by the mother, and he walked in the ways of the house of Ahab, which is to say, did evil in the eyes of the Lord, as the house of Ahab had done, for he was related by marriage to Ahab's family. So he allied with Joram, king of Israel, so the king on the other side. So you can see that means 841, before Jehu became king, right? Joram was still king of Israel sometime in 841. So Ahaziah allied with Joram, king of Israel, against Hazael, king of Aram at Ramoth Gilead. Remember Hazael? He was the one we were talking about just now, right? We covered him in the earlier part of 2 Kings chapter 8. He assassinated, yes. Hazael assassinated his king Ben-Hadad. So he became king. He became king. And so now he became a problem to Ahaziah, because Ahaziah and Joram of Israel went to fight against him at Ramoth Gilead. And then the Arameans, that means Hazael, wounded Joram, and this is the Joram of Israel. So Joram returned to Jezreel to recover from his wounds in his battle with Hazael. And so this king of Judah, Ahaziah, visited Joram, who was wounded at Jezreel, which was in Israel. And there he witnessed Jehu killing Joram. And so he was frightened because Joram also wanted to kill him because he was connected with Ahab. So he fled, but later on he was himself also killed by Jehu. So all this took place within one short year of 841 BC. And this was the same year that Jehu became king, starting from 841 to 814 BC. Jehu ruled for 28 years in Israel. His story takes place over 2 chapters, 2 Kings chapter 9 and chapter 10. You can read the full story for yourself. I will just go through some of the main points. Okay, so the main points was that Jehu was anointed to be king by a prophet, that Elisha. Just now I said Elisha was still active. So Elisha sent a prophet from the company of prophets to look for Jehu at Ramoth Gilead. He was one of the army commander. He was the army commander. And so the prophet told Jehu, when he anointed him, that God wanted him to destroy the house of Ahab, his master. So this is a time that Ahab and all his wicked family would face judgment from God at the hands of Jehu. So Jehu would be God's instrument of justice against the evil Ahab and his family. Then Jehu, after being anointed king, he conspired against Joram, the king before him, who was Ahab's descendant, who had been defending Ramoth Gilead against Hazael, king of Aram. But Joram had returned to Jezreel after being wounded by Hazael, and he went there to recover from the wounds in the battle with Hazael. And so Jehu went to Jezreel, where he shot Joram with an arrow. I'm shortening the story, right? I'm shortening the story. You should read the chapter for yourself. But he met Joram and he shot Joram with an arrow that pierced his heart. And Joram died. Then Ahaziah, king of Judah, was visiting Joram there, and he saw what happened and he escaped. But Jehu's men also wounded him while he was fleeing in his chariot. Then Jehu started a violent campaign to exterminate the entire Ahab dynasty. He started with ordering that Jezebel, Ahab's wife, be thrown down from her window, because she looked down from her window and they saw each other, right? And then Jehu said, "Who is with me?" And then there were 2 eunuchs looking out of the window that Jezebel was also looking out of. And then he told the 2 eunuchs to go and throw her down. So very violent death. She was thrown down, she died, and then the dogs ate up her flesh, as the prophet Elijah had prophesied, leaving her skull, feet, and hands. So a rather violent death, because she was a wicked person. And then Jehu exterminated Ahab's house of 70 sons, killed all the 70, and he went on to also kill the prophets of Baal and totally destroy Baal worship. And he tore down the temple of Baal, and the people used it for a latrine. So people used the broken down temple as a toilet. And so that destroyed all Baal worship in Israel. But the thing is, Jehu did not turn away from the sins of Jehoram the first. Jehoram the first. Remember, the first king that came to rule over Israel was Jehoram the first, and he made 2 golden calves at Bethel and Dan for the people to worship, so that they would not worship God at Jerusalem. So that apparently that worship of the golden calves was never totally removed. And a lot of the kings of Israel did not turn away from the sins of Jehoram the first. And so that tells us that Jehoram was, in a sense, again, like David, a standard. He was the standard of disobedience, the standard of idolatry. He set the precedent, right? He set the example which many kings after him followed, which was, of course, a bad example, was bad for Israel. Now, God told Jehu he would let Jehu's descendants sit on the throne of Israel to the 4th generation. To the 4th generation. God actually wanted to allow Jehu to have a lasting dynasty if he obeyed, but he did not. So he would only have a dynasty up to the 4th generation, because he did not keep the law of the Lord with all his heart. Even though he destroyed the Baal worship of Ahab and Jezebel, he did not get rid of the worship set up by Jeroboam, right? And he did not turn away from the sins of Jeroboam. So his attack on Judah's king, Ahaziah, this king over here, right? This king here, his attack on Ahaziah, when he killed Ahaziah, gave Athaliah the opportunity to seize Judah's throne, because there was no king. So it created a vacuum on the throne of Judah. And that was where Athaliah seized the chance to take the throne. At the same time, the Bible does tell us a little bit of extra information that in those days, the Lord reduced the size of Israel through Hazael. So you can see that Hazael committed evil by doing a lot of bad things in Israel, and he actually conquered some of the territory of Israel. And that was partly God's judgment of consequences on Israel for their disobedience. He did not protect Israel because they were not faithful to him. So what happened was, with Ahaziah killed, right, killed by Jehu, as I said just now, the throne was unoccupied, and his mother, Athaliah, grabbed the throne. So all this happened in the space of 841 BC, right? You can see 841 BC, Athaliah started the rule, right? Jehu also started in 841, and then Ahaziah also came on the throne in 841. And within that 1 year, so many things happened. Athaliah was queen for 6 years. You can read her story in 2 Kings 11 and 2 Chronicles 22 gives a parallel account up to 2 Chronicles 23. So quite a bit of story because it was not just about her, it was also about the next king. The key points is that she was the only queen that ruled. Out of the two kingdoms of Israel and Judah, she was the only queen, and she usurped the throne on her son's death. And then she tried to kill all her grandsons. You see how wicked she was? She tried to kill all the grandsons. But she did not succeed in killing the last one, who was an infant, and that was Joash, who survived. But eventually, at the end of 6 years, Athaliah herself was killed by a priestly coup by Jehoiada. Jehoiada was the priest who looked after Joash. So 6 years later, right, in 835 BC, Joash would come to the throne after Athaliah was killed. So let's see the story. That's the story found in 2 Chronicles 22 to 23. It tells one of the versions of Athaliah's story, and Joash's story, you can see it overlaps. 2 Chronicles 23, Joash story is also 2 Chronicles 23 and 24. And his story continues Athaliah from 2 Kings 11 verse 21 to chapter 12. Joash was the son of Judah's Ahaziah. That was here, up here, right? And he was the grandson of Judah's royal couple Jehoram and Athaliah. So Athaliah was unable to kill her last grandson, Joash. Key points about Joash: he was saved as a baby by his aunt Yehosheba, and then she kept him for the 7 years, and then he was crowned as king when he was 7 years old. And uncle Jehoiada the priest presented him with a copy of the covenant and proclaimed him king at the temple in a secret ceremony. Yeah, in a secret ceremony that Athaliah did not know. But there was such a great commotion because, you know, they celebrated the king, the coronation of King Joash, and Athaliah was attracted by the noises. She heard the noises at the temple, right? And so she went to the temple to investigate what was happening, and she saw the king, Joash, wearing the crown already, standing by the pillar, which was the traditional thing for the king to do. When the king was crowned, he would stand by the pillar. And she shouted treason, and she attracted attention to herself, and they caught her and they put her to death. Then Jehoiada made a covenant between the Lord and the king and the people that they would be the Lord's people. So here is a priest who remembers that the people and the king must make a covenant with God. And so he took that initiative, and then they tore down the temple of Baal. They smashed the altars and idols, and they also killed Matan, the priest of Baal. And so Joash did what was right in the eyes of the Lord all the years that Jehoiada, the priest, instructed him. So he had a guardian, he had an instructor who guided him, and he initiated the repair of the temple that had been abandoned. But he failed to remove the high places. So that was something that he did not do that was complete. And the people continued to offer sacrifices and burn incense there. And then Hazael comes back into the story, captured Gath, so the Philistine town. And then after that, he came and attacked Jerusalem. So Joash sent the sacred objects and treasuries of the Lord's temple and the palace as tribute to Hazael, who then withdrew. Right? So you can see Hazael, when he took over as king, he was pretty active and he was pretty strong. Right? Joash turned away from God later, after the death of Jehoiada, and he listened. He turned away from God and he listened to the officials of Judah. Not a good thing happened because they abandoned the temple of the Lord. So you see just now, he initiated the repair of the temple, but then with Jehoiada gone, he abandoned the temple of the Lord, and they worshipped Asherah poles and idols. So went back to Baal idol worship. And so God's anger came on Judah and Jerusalem because of their guilt. You can read that in 2 Chronicles 24. Now, God did not keep quiet. God is always concerned to get people back on track. So the Lord sent prophets to testify against the people, to bring them back to Him. God is constantly trying to find ways, trying to find people to speak on His behalf and turn the people who backslide back to Him. Yeah, but they did not listen, and worse, they plotted against Zechariah, son of Jehoiada the priest, who said that they would not prosper. So Zechariah said that they would not prosper because they forsook the Lord and He would forsake them. So that was what has been happening with Israel, and Zechariah warned that that would happen to them as well. Apparently, they didn't like to hear what he had to say. Yeah, sometimes, words of rebuke, words of correction are not music to our ears. We just don't like, and we don't like the person who talks. So they stoned Zechariah to death in the courtyard of the Lord's temple. And the Bible makes a statement that King Joash did not remember the kindness that Zechariah's father Jehoiada had shown him, but he killed his son Zechariah, who said as he lay dying, "May the Lord see this and call you to account." 2 Chronicles 24. So once again, you see somebody who believes that God sees and God will make us answer for our deeds. Like Hazael, he was given a chance to know the future, knowing that God is sovereign and he will have to answer to God one day. So this theme of remembering kindness, the Bible highlights that Joash did not remember the kindness shown to him by Zechariah's father, the priest Jehoiada, and this underscores the importance of being grateful and remembering people's kindness. It is important for us to be kind to others and also to remember the kindness others have offered to us. The Bible tells us that kindness is a fruit of the Spirit. Galatians chapter 5, verse 22. So you see, the concept of kindness is something good something important to develop because it is a fruit. Now, we should not look at kindness in just being kind by giving things, by giving money, by giving help, by, we are quite willing to be kind by supporting and encouraging. But we should also be kind in attitude and spirit. Especially in behavior and attitude of being kind and gracious, to overlook offenses and forgive. One thing I noticed about people, about Christians, is Christians are very kind in doing a lot of things. But the kindness in being gracious when somebody steps on the toe, there's little kindness and grace. Yeah. That is a little bit sad because we can do a lot of kind things, give money, give things, support, help, encourage really very generously. But when it comes to kindness of spirit and attitude, we get offended, and we find it we find that we kind of like cannot accept or cannot overlook sometimes people's lack of perfection. Can I put it that way? Yeah, we kind of like get upset with them. And so that is the kind of kindness that we must also exercise. That is a kindness of attitude, kindness of spirit that goes beyond just physical things. So another thing to look at is the theme of accountability. Jesus referred to the murder of another Zechariah, son of Barachiah, murdered between the temple and the altar in Matthew 23, verse 35 and Luke 11:51. It's quite interesting because we think that this is the Zechariah Jesus is referring to, this Zechariah, but then the thing is, this Zechariah's father was Jehoiada, Zechariah, son of Jehoiada, whereas Jesus said Zechariah, son of Barachiah. So it appears to be a different Zechariah from this son of Jehoiada. But despite the difference, Jesus was really highlighting the pattern of violence against God's servants throughout Israel's history. And Jesus in Matthew 23:35 talks about the killing of God's servant from the Hebrew Bible, from Abel. The first person Abel, Cain and Abel, that Abel, all the way to Zechariah. So interestingly, English is A to Z. Abel is A, Zechariah is A to Z. So Jesus was highlighting the violence against God's servants throughout Israel's history from A to Z. That means from Genesis to 2nd Chronicles. And in the Hebrew Bible, 2nd Chronicles is actually the last book. So if I may say, it's literally A to Z. Genesis is A and 2nd Chronicles is Z. Okay, Jesus was highlighting the pattern of violence against God's servants throughout Israel's history. And he was pronouncing judgment. Jesus was pronouncing judgment on the religious leaders of his day, that they, like their ancestors, were responsible for rejecting and killing the prophets, culminating in their rejection of Jesus himself, the greatest prophet and messenger of God. And here, it's happening with Zechariah by Joash, who killed him. So Jesus' words underscore this thematic continuity. This theme that continues about the rejection and persecution and even killing of God's messengers throughout history. And that is done by God's people themselves, right? So it is a sad story that God's people kill God's messengers. And that's something we talked about yesterday in the the 28th and last session of the story of accountability, right? Saying we explored the concept that God's people, whether as individuals or as a nation, they continued, even though they had the law of God, they continued to commit evil instead of righteousness and justice. Yeah, instead of righteousness and justice, even though they were God's people. It's something for us to think about today, even as Christians, right? Because we are not very different in our human nature. How are we as people of God today? Okay, so we look now at Jehoahaz, right? Jehoahaz was the son of Jehu. After he passed away, the throne went to his son Jehoahaz from 814 to 798 BC, and he reigned for 17 years. You can read his story in 2 Kings chapter 13, a short 9 verses. And as son of Jehu, he became king of Israel in the 23rd year of Joash, son of Ahaziah, king of Judah. So these are now the two kings, the concurrent kings, or rather the two kings reigning in power in the two kingdoms. Jehoahaz did evil in the eyes of the Lord by following the sins of Jeroboam. So you can see Jeroboam is always being compared as the standard of evil that the succeeding kings of Israel committed in the eyes of the Lord. He was the standard of evil. And so many of these kings continued to follow in his sins. And so naturally, the same thing, the Lord's anger burned against Israel. And for a long time, Israel was kept under the power of Hazael. All right, so you may remember just now we revised last week's story of Hazael, that he would kill a lot of Israel's people, right, in a very cruel way. And so he was here in power, all right, keeping Israel under his power, and Ben-Hadad his son. Ben-Hadad his son, 2 Kings 13 verse 3. So Hazael became king, and he named his own son Ben-Hadad. Does this name Ben-Hadad sound familiar? Ben-Hadad was also the name of the king that he assassinated. Okay, we'll explore why these two kings, including Hazael's own son, was called Ben-Hadad in a little while. Let's finish this. Let's finish Jehoahaz's story first. So the kingdom that Jehoahaz inherited was beset by wars against Aram. That means Hazael kept attacking Jehoahaz of Israel. So, and that was where God reduced the size of Israel. We talked about that just now, right? In those days, God reduced the size of Israel through Hazael. So once again, we get the idea, and the Lord kept Israel oppressed. So you can see once again that Hazael was not a nice person. He oppressed Israel. He and his son Ben-Hadad. Well, Jehoahaz sought the Lord's favor, and God listened to him. So here is one of the rare times when a king of Israel actually went to look for God's help. And seeing how severely the king of Aram was oppressing Israel, God provided a deliverer. A lot like the story during the time of Judges, right? God saw how the enemies were oppressing Israel, and God provided a deliverer. And this is Jehoahaz doing the same thing by seeking the Lord's favor. So God provided a deliverer, and that was how they lived in their own homes as before. So somehow they managed to wrestle free of Hazael's control of some of those places of Israel, right? And so they were able to go back to live in their own homes. But sadly, they didn't learn their lesson. They continued in the sins of Jeroboam, with the Asherah pole still standing in Samaria. And that is very similar to nowadays. There are some people, who pray to God, and God answer their prayer. God gave them what they want by answering their prayer. And after that, they forgot God and they went back to their old non-Christian ways. Yeah, so you can see, story of human nature and people seems to repeat itself many times in history. So that's what happened here as well. Now, the king of Aram, right, that was Hazael, and then followed by his son Ben-Hadad, destroyed Jehoahaz's army, except for 50 horsemen. Wow. Can you imagine? The army is just the size of 50 people, 50 horsemen, 10 chariots, and 10,000 foot soldiers. And therefore, it shows us how powerful Hazael and later on his son Ben-Hadad were. Yeah, that they reduced Israel's army to this miserable size. But what we can see as a summary is that Hazael, king of Aram, oppressed Israel throughout Jehoahaz's reign, and Jehoahaz was a vassal. That means he was conquered by Hazael, right? And he had to pay tribute. He had to pay tribute. And Israel suffered greatly during his reign. But again, the Lord showed that he was gracious, and he showed compassion and concern because of his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And he was unwilling to destroy them or banish them from his presence. 2 Kings 13. So we can see that it is God's grace that Israel continued to exist. Because a miserable little army like this, Hazael could have just continued to fight on and destroy them. But out of God's grace, Israel continued to exist because of God's faithfulness in his covenants to the fathers, to the patriarchs. And nevertheless, we find Israel constantly suffered the consequences of idolatry and not obeying God, never learned the lesson. And Israel's constant problems remind us of the need to check ourselves if we are being faithful in obeying God's covenant terms, not like, Joash, who was not faithful. He was faithful only for a while, and then after that, he allowed himself to be influenced. Okay, so I'm sorry I didn't finish the story of Joash, so I come back to finish off the story of Joash. We see that the Lord delivered the larger army of Judah and Jerusalem also into the hands of a small Aramean army with only a few men. So this time there is a battle of the Arameans who had a small army with only a few men, and yet they could defeat and execute judgment on Joash. And the simple reason is because Judah had forsaken the Lord, the God of their fathers, and he was severely wounded by the Arameans. 2 Chronicles 24. And then when he went back home, he was assassinated in his bed by his officials at Beit Millo. So we can see that Joash was faithful to God only as long as priest Jehoiada was alive. And he was one of those people that needed constant godly influence. Once Jehoiada was gone, he stopped being steadfast and allowed himself to be adversely influenced. Okay, so you can see that there were important but ungodly people, the officials of Judah, who influenced him and led him astray. It shows once again the importance of continual godly influence and the right company, the right influences of people in our lives. And Joash failed that. Well, you can see that he started well with guidance and help, but did not end well. He was not careful to seek people who would guide him, and even when Zechariah spoke up, he was party to killing Zechariah. And so God held Joash responsible for Judah, forsaking him, because Joash failed to fulfill his role as king described during Samuel's time. That was the time that they first came up with the idea of a human king. And the role of the human king was to lead the people under God's authority and sovereignty. And so we can see that all these kings from Israel and many of these kings from Judah, including Joash, did a very bad job. Now, just now we talked about Ben-Hadad. If you remember, I was saying that how come Hazael and his son was also named Ben-Hadad? Well, let's take a look at the story behind this Ben-Hadad. Now, it appears that Ben-Hadad was actually a common title used by the kings of Aram Damascus. It's a little bit like what we see in Egypt, where the kings were called Pharaoh. So every king that came along was called Pharaoh. Yeah, so not surprisingly, you would think that it's the same person, but actually it's not. And same way, right, Ben-Hadad was the title used for the kings of Aram Damascus, and the simple reason is the meaning. The name means son of Hadad. Yeah, so Ben means son. So Ben-Hadad means son of Hadad. And what is Hadad? Hadad is the Aramean god of storm and thunder. Okay, so they named the king after the god of storm and thunder, calling him the son of the god of storm and thunder. And this was not just the king of, this was not just the god of Aram, it was also an Edomite god. So various places, they worship the same god, the same idol. And most scholars believe that there were at least 3 distinct kings of Aram Damascus who were called by this title Ben-Hadad. Ben-Hadad the first, right, was a contemporary of Kings Baasha of Israel and Asa of Judah in the late 9th century BC. And he attacked northern Israel at Asa's request. And then we have the second Ben-Hadad, who was the son of the previous Ben-Hadad. So this Ben-Hadad first, his son was the second one. And this was the one who fought against Ahab of Israel in the mid-9th century BC, and later assassinated by Hazael, who then took over the throne and became king. And so Ben-Hadad the third was son of Hazael, right? And he ruled in the early 8th century BC. and he was oppressed by the Assyrian king Adad-nirari III and lost much territory to the Israelite kings Jehoahaz and Joash later on. So, in summary, the biblical authors used this dynastic name, Ben-Hadad, to refer to multiple kings of Aram Damascus. And later than it's being a past person, rather than it's being a personal name that passed down. Ben-Hadad was the title of a king. So Hazael likely named his son Ben-Hadad in order to continue the dynastic tradition and claim legitimacy, right? To call his son Ben-Hadad is to say that he has the legitimate rights to be king, even though he was not the son of the previous Ben-Hadad that Hazael assassinated. So Hazael named his son Ben-Hadad so that he has legitimacy and follows dynastic tradition, that the kings would be called Ben-Hadad. Okay, so that's the reason we find the name Ben-Hadad popping up quite a few times in the Bible. Okay, so we continue the story with the northern kingdom, right? Jehoash, also known as Joash, right? 798 to 782 BC, became king for 16 years. His story is in 2 Kings 13. Key points: he became king of Israel, the third king in the Yehu dynasty, in the 37th year of Joash, king of Judah. So you can see once again, two kings with the same name, Joash or Jehoash. And this one did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and again is said to be, did not turn from the sins of Jeroboam, right? The sins of Jeroboam. So Jeroboam continues to be the standard of evil, standard of wrong. And Jehoash warred against Amaziah, king of Judah. So these two kings would fight later on. Okay, so this Jehoash was the 12th king of Israel, whereas Amaziah would be the 9th king of Judah. Continue with Jehoash through the prophetic ministry of Elisha. So Elisha was still around, but very old, and he was suffering from the illness that he would die from. And Jehoash regained some lost Israelite towns from Aram. Like we said just now, that he would claim back much territory from Hazael's son Ben-Hadad. Okay, so Jehoash. So what happened was Jehoash gained some lost Israelite towns from Aram because of Elisha's ministry. Elisha prophesied that this king, Joash, would destroy the Arameans at Aphek. And this king struck the ground with the arrows as Elisha told him to do, but he struck the ground only 3 times. And once again, Elisha is called the man of God. So Elisha was angry because he said that, oh, Joash, you should have struck the ground 5 or 6 times. If you did it 5 or 6 times, then you would defeat and completely destroy Aram. But now you will only defeat Aram 3 times. And so after that, Elisha died and was buried. And later on, Jehoash did not survive very long. He was assassinated in a conspiracy. Now, Jehoash showed uncertainty and lack of faith. Something for us to learn, doubt, lack of faith. He struck the ground only 3 times. And after Hazael died, Jehoash defeated his son Ben-Hadad 3 times. thanks to Elisha's prophetic ministry as the chariots and horsemen of Israel. You remember this was the title that Elisha called Elijah as well, right? Meaning that this is the military might of Israel, which is to say that these prophets, Elijah and Elisha, they really had the power of God where they could minister to the army of Israel so that they gave Israel the victory against their enemies. And so they are just as good as the chariots and horsemen. They're just as good as the army of Israel. Okay, and so then Jehoash recaptured the lost Israelite towns. So if you can picture the story, Hazael and his son were Hazael was very effective in capturing Israelite territories, and in the beginning, Ben-Hadad, his son, was also quite good at capturing, but later on, towards the end, we find that Israel hit back, and under Elisha, right, Israel was actually able to recapture the lost Israelite towns from Ben-Hadad, the son of Hazael. So we find that the reigns of Joash or Jehoash and Jeroboam the second. So this is now the entry of the second king called Jeroboam, right? So Joash and Jeroboam the second, Jeroboam was his son, overlap because Jeroboam the second was co-regent with his father Joash around 793 BC, ruling alongside him until Joash died. And so this co-regent system helped to ensure a stable and orderly transition of power to make sure that the throne was not snatched by somebody else. Okay, so we go back now to the southern kingdom of Judah, where we find Amaziah was king, and he was king 2 years after Jehoash became king. And he reigned for 29 years. Story can be found in 2 Kings 14 and 2 Chronicles 25. Key points, he began to reign, as I said, 2 years later. So second year of Jehoash, son of Jehoahaz, king of Israel. And again, he was initially faithful. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. But on the good side, for a good king, they are often compared with David. For a bad king, they are compared with Jeroboam. For a good king, they are compared with David. And he didn't do what was right to the same degree as David, but in everything he followed the example of his father Joash. And then he did not remove the high places, and the people still sacrificed and burned incense there, just like Joash. Joash also didn't remove the high places. And so Amaziah executed the officials who killed his father Joash, but he did not kill their children. And that was in accordance with the law of Moses. 2 Kings 14 and 2 Chronicles said, where the law of Moses said that the father shall not be killed for the sins of the sons, and the sons shall not be killed for the sins of the fathers. Right? So each person will die for their own sin. And so Amaziah hired 100,000 soldiers from Israel. So he went to the other side to pay for 100 soldiers with 100 talents of silver. But then a man of God came to him and said, no, you cannot let these men march with you, because God is not with you, and God will overthrow you if you fight, even if they fight courageously in battle. So Amaziah sent them back. He wasted all that money hiring them, but he sent them back. Okay, and this put them in a great rage. Now, the story goes with Amaziah marshalling his army to the Valley of Salt. And this time, without the soldiers from Israel, God helped him to defeat 10,000 Edomites, right? And then he brought back their gods. You see this silly king? The Edomites were defeated by him with God's help, and he brought back their gods and worshipped them. Then this led to God's anger, and a prophet came to rebuke him. 2 Chronicles 25. Right, so while fighting the Edomites, the troops that he had sent back raided Judean towns from Samaria to Beth Horon, and they killed 3,000 men, and rather 3,000 people, and carried off great quantities of plunder. And so it helps us to see how wicked the fighting men of Israel were. See, they were angry. They attacked their own people in their anger. And that's a question for us. Do we also fight among ourselves as Christians? When we are angry, do we fight among ourselves? Do we attack each other? Right? So you can see, if we do that, how we are very much like the people of Israel and Judah, doing the wrong things. Well, Amaziah stubbornly provoked a war with Jehoash, who was very silly. After God helped him, God told him, you don't need those 100,000 soldiers. You don't need those 100,000 soldiers. So he went to Edom and he defeated the Edomites, and then he worshipped their gods. And then after that, he went to provoke a war with Jehoash of Israel. And too bad for him, he was defeated and he was captured at Beth Shemesh. And Jehoash broke down Jerusalem's wall, and he looted all the gold, silver, and articles in the temple and palace treasuries. And he captured hostages to Samaria. And his hostages would include Amaziah himself. Okay, and later he Amaziah fled from conspirators to Lachish, but he was assassinated there. So we see that Amaziah lacked consistency in his commitment to God. He started well, but he did not do a thorough job of obeying God, and he ended badly. He made rash and bad decisions that cost him and his people, and that's where we see that stubbornness led to his downfall. And his son Uzziah would take over later on, and they would be co-regent also. Okay, now before that, let's look at Jeroboam the second, 793 for 41 years. Can read about his story in 2 Kings 14. So son of Jehoash, he was the fourth king of the Yehu dynasty. And his long and prosperous reign started as a co-regent with his father Jehoash, becoming king in the 15th year of Amaziah. And again, he did evil in the Lord's sight, continuing the sins of Jeroboam, which involved idolatry and worshipping the golden calves. For him, Jeroboam II, he restored Israel's former borders, including Damascus and Hamath, which belonged to Judah in the days of David and Solomon, right? And this was in response to prophecy by Jonah, the prophet Jonah. And his reign saw significant economic prosperity and relative peace, and Israel experienced a period of stability and wealth. So they did well, and he was a contemporary of prophets Jonah, Amos, and Hosea, and they delivered messages of social injustice, idolatry, and impending judgment because the people were unfaithful to God. And even though they prospered, they prospered and they had relative peace, you see all these terrible practices happening. Despite his evil practices, the Lord saw the suffering of everyone in Israel. So you have people who are doing well and the people who are suffering, both slave and free, with no one to help them. And since God had not said he would blot out the name of Israel from under heaven, he saved them from the enemies by Jeroboam and did not allow their complete destruction. Okay, so next session, we will see the book of Jonah. You can read it for yourself in advance from now to next week. Okay, Jonah prophesied victory during his reign, this Jeroboam II's reign, but for himself, Jonah was sent by God to Nineveh to preach repentance. And the book of Jonah is not about his activities in Israel. It tells about God's message for Jonah to deliver to Nineveh. And this period of Jeroboam II's reign was marked by the expansion of the Israelite king, but at the same time, the dominance of the Assyrian Empire. So more and more, the Assyrian Empire would come up strongly in history, and the Assyrian Empire was a significant threat to Israel. Let's look finally tonight at Azariah, who was also called Uzziah, from 792 for 52 years. And you can read his story in 2 Kings 15 and 2 Chronicles 26. He reigned in the 27th year of Jeroboam, king of Israel, and he was king at age of 16 after his father Amaziah died, and likely he was a co-regent with his father. Possibly the people of Israel placed the young Azariah or Uzziah on the throne when his father was taken prisoner by Joash to Israel. 2 Kings 14. Remember just now, we saw that he provoked the war with Joash, and then he was captured at Beth Shemesh, right? And so when he was taken away as prisoner, that was the time that his son, Azariah or Uzziah, was placed on the throne. Now, Uzziah or Azariah did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, following his father's temple, and he sought God during the days of Zechariah. So this is another Zechariah who instructed him in the fear of God as long as he sought God. And so God gave him success. But the high places again were not removed, so people continued to offer sacrifices and burn incense there. We find God helping him in the war against the Philistines, the Arabs, and the Meunites. And he extended Judah's territory because of God helping him. And he actually built cities in Philistine cities, right? And also the Ammonites brought him tribute. He was able to strengthen Jerusalem by building towers, and he fortified them. And then he constructed fortresses in the wilderness, and he dug many cisterns because he had much livestock. Then he built a strong military force and developed new weapons, like machines to shoot arrows and hurl large stones. So this king was very innovative, right? And then he loved the soil. He promoted agriculture. He had many farmers and vine dressers in the hills and fertile lands, and he brought the nation to a prosperous reign. He also had a well-organized and equipped army with skilled men in charge of the war equipment. So you can see that during this period, these two kings were doing very well. Azariah or Uzziah and Jeroboam II, they were doing very well. But on one hand, Israel, the people, even though they were prosperous, they were still poor and terrible things happening. So we finish off Uzziah's story with success leading to pride and disobedience. So this is always a very great danger. when he unlawfully entered the Lord's temple to burn incense. Okay, he burned incense, and that was a duty that was only done by priests. And the priest confronted him. He became angry, but as a result of that struggle, God struck him with leprosy. And he lived isolated in a separate house, co-regent with his son Jotham, who governed the people of the land. Now, he was not buried in the tombs of the kings because of his leprosy, so he had a bad ending. And the prophets active during his reign were Amos, Hosea, and Isaiah. And they addressed issues including, once again, social injustice, idolatry, and the need for repentance. So it shows that the religious and the social conditions of the times were very chaotic, right? Even though there was prosperity, they were not very right with God. And Isaiah began his prophetic ministry in the year that he died. And summary is that Judah enjoyed a stable period under Uzziah, but northern Israel faced much stability because one king after another was assassinated. Okay, so I finished the story here, right? Sorry, there's no more time left for discussion, which we can take offline. Let us pray. Thank you, God, for your word to us, to help us see that we are just like the kings of Israel and Judah in the way we behave. We can be like people, your people, and yet still be doing the wrong things that are not pleasing to you. And we can also be your people who do the right things. And we pray, Father, Lord, that we are obedient to you, that each of us desires to seek you and to honor and obey you, and also to be a good influence for you, O Lord. Help us so that we are not influenced by others for the bad, but we can be stable, we can be consistent, and we can be a good influencer for you. We pray and commit ourselves to you in Jesus' mighty name. Amen.